stay on the Wales point with that one with the centres because that is something I wanted to speak to you about. Who do you think is like the outstanding ones? Because it seems like Gatland's got this idea of what he wants, but I feel like the game might be going in a slightly different way. Like Gatland is clearly wanting that big 12 who's just trucking it up, but it seems like the better 12s at the moment seem to be like the footballers, like Ben Thomas, that type of player. Even though he seems to think that Thomas is a 10, which I think he was more than capable of playing there. But if he's not going to play there week in, week out, it just makes no sense to me. And I would have liked to have seen him get an opportunity in Australia in that position. But is that more, do you think, of an indictment of where we are at 10 rather than him as a centre?
Yeah, it probably reflects where we are at 10 more than anything, and that no one's really kind of nailed that position down. But at the same time, I still think if he wants that big centre, I don't think playing Grady there is the answer. I think you've got players like, obviously Eddie James went on tour and only played against the Reds. He did come on against South Africa, but it would have been interesting to see him have a go at 12. He's big lump himself. And you've also got Max Llewellyn at Gloucester, who he was in that World Cup training squad, but hasn't really had a sniff since. And kind of the way he plays is a lot more reminiscent of a Jamie Roberts kind of crashing the ball. So I think if he wants to go down that route, I don't think Mason Grady is the option. But again, yeah, I do agree that kind of having a bit of a footballer at 12 would be a lot more beneficial, especially as we touched upon before, the kind of having that in your arsenal of teams are going to suss out very quickly if you've got like a Jamie Roberts type player, that if you just chuck a player to mark him, that your game plan's kind of out the window a bit. Yeah. And whereas like if you've got a footballer there's a bit more kind of to threaten them with. But it's just a case of if he's going to... I feel like it was a bit of a wasted opportunity that in Australia used Grady at 12 because I don't think that was going to ever go anywhere. I think Grady's a great player, but I agree. Do not think he's a 12 whatsoever. And so it was really a wasted opportunity. So I think in the autumn there needs to be kind of some sort of... And if he alternates to 12s, then that's not a bad thing. But he can't just stick with someone at 12 who's very clearly not a 12.
Mm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you always see with Grady where he seems to ever sort of make spaces when he's working on the wider arc. So like it just doesn't make sense to me why he's trying to box him into this like. And I think like certain players like Thomas and an Aaron Owen, players like that, they might not be the most natural ball carrier, but they seem to use like their footballing ability and like their vision to pick the gaps and the lines. They seem to like be able to find the holes better. Especially Thomas, the last couple of years, he's gone streets ahead with that sort of vision of where he's going to find the hole. And then Aaron Owen does that as well, really well. But I'm with you. I think Eddie James is probably the guy moving forward because he can just do everything. And like you said, I think it was a missed opportunity not giving him a chance in the summer to actually show if he can play at that level and fit that system, which I think he can.
Yeah, I think Hugh Griffin on Twitter once did a really good thread about how you kind of need that cohesion in the centres as well. That there's very rarely been examples of centres who've never played with each other that have then performed exceptionally on the international level. They need to run a games together. Yeah. And you could kind of argue that with like Jamie Roberts and Jonathan Davis were a formidable pair. But it wasn't like from the minute they started playing with each other. It was very much after a run of games. And I think if you look at something like that, like you can go for then Eddie James at 12 and Joe Roberts at 13, or something like Max Llewellyn at 12 and Mason Grady at 13. I think you kind of need that level of cohesion. And granted, like Nick Tompkins and George North were probably the exception to some degree, that they haven't had a huge amount of games together. But at the same time, you've got George North at that point who'd been playing international rugby for almost 15 years, and Nick Tompkins who'd won so many trophies with Saracens, that you had that experience there, which you just do not have anymore. You don't have players
Yeah,
who are like as successful coming through at the moment, which is obviously a shame. But I think you need kind of some level of players who, and I'd argue it again the same time with like shuffling Owen Watkin from 12 to 13 multiple times, not kind of giving him an actual position and then never playing with the same person at 12 if he was a 13, or
yeah,
never playing with the same 13 if he was a 12. It's always a different player he has outside him or inside him.
yeah. And putting him I could understand why Gatland wanted to give Grady a bit of experience in the summer, having him outside him, but especially at international level, I just don't think you can get away with his pace in that position. And he's no slouch, don't get me wrong, but not to what that international standard is. It's just a little bit quicker, and I think he's so much better with his defensive reads and stuff at 12, where it's a lot more like in front of him rather than they're trying to get outside, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I was kind of conflicted for years as to whether Watkin was a 12 or a 13, but I kind of thought that there was a bit more about him at 12. Like he offered
Yeah,
more of a threat. And again, you kind of talk about a kind of football in 12, obviously not kind of in the same mould as Ben Thomas, but he's got that bit about him, that kind of deception where he can kind of run round someone. I think there was all sorts of times where like he'd be at like 13 and Hallahola would be at 12, and then like a few months later for Wales they'd be playing the same team swapped over. Same with like Nick Tompkins. It was kind of, they could never make their mind up. Granted, this was like under Pivot, so we're talking a long time ago now, but they
yeah,
can never make their mind up, and I think it really kind of wasted a number of years of kind of getting that centre partnership that could just take us forward for like the next 10 years. We had Jamie Robertson, Jonathan Davis for so many years putting in shifts each week that I think that's really the worry. That and the same goes for chopping and changing kind of the fly half, that you have a scrum half who's playing with a fly half he's not familiar with whatsoever, that it's not going to do us any favours. And then look at the other nations, they've had kind of settled players in the centres or in the half backs, and that's why there's no real worry. There's like an element of trust there that they know what each other are going to do. And I
yeah,
think, yeah, going forward, something needs to be decided. Granted, it's only the start of the World Cup cycle, but I do think something needs to kind of be done. Just make a judgment call, even if someone's not 100% settled in a position. Just give them
yeah,
that run of games to kind of get them there.
yeah. And I completely agree. And like I say, even though we are at the beginning of that World Cup cycle, we're no closer after last year to narrowing it down as to who it's going to be, which is what is a bit of a worry. And like it goes back to, it was a wasted opportunity this summer. Um, but it's difficult because we don't know who 10 is, and they chopped and changed scrum half quite a lot until Thomas made it impossible to drop him. So yeah, it's a tricky one, and I think Gatland needs to really, this autumn now and this Six Nations, they need to proper hone in on, you know, what this starting 15 is not. I mean, everywhere we need to know now, because it's okay if you want to tinker and chop and change over a cycle, but you need these guys to, like you say, to all bed in now and start to realize what the guy next to him is going to do, and you know where he's going to be and what his strengths are, and where you can complement each other. Because at the moment it seems like every game there's like 3 or 4 different changes, and you just can't get anywhere like that.
No, not at all. And we're falling behind against the other nations as it is, like regardless of anything. And it seems the kind of decisions being made are just not helping anyone in any kind of way. And I see a lot on like Twitter, people kind of saying how disappointing it is that Wales aren't the same team that they were a few years ago, just for like the overall Six Nations. And I think like going back to like the fly half position, I think going forward you could see Anscombe may be the one who's given the kind of keys to the 10 role, but
Yeah.
not sure how old he is now. But he's not really going to make the next World Cup, is he? And he's had all sorts of issues with injuries. That again, you could put him in there to kind of just have that experienced head to kind of give the other guys a chance, rather than playing someone like Ben Thomas at a 12 or 10. But what benefit is that going to have in the long run?
Yeah. I mean, in the long run, not necessarily, but I would do the same thing as you and go with Anscombe because I feel like he can raise the players up around him. We need to, like we're saying, create this cohesion at centre if you're going to have young centres or an untested centre partnership. To have someone like Anscombe, I mean, we saw the difference he made in the World Cup when he came in. Was it against Australia? And he'd been out for so long, and he just came in and just completely run the show. And it was like, that's just the quality is a different level. With all due respect to Costello, like whenever he's been given an opportunity, and I really rate him, and I do think there's a good player in there, and I think he's just been caught up in this whole sort of mess that Welsh rugby has been. The Scarlets have been poor, Wales have been poor, and I think given enough time and enough quality and like just basically calmness around him, I think a good player is going to come out of him. It's just whether he's like too scarred from the last couple of years of what's happened, because I think he's come under a lot of flack and not all of it is fair.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. I think it's probably a blessing in disguise that he went to the World Cup last year, because I know that Gatland didn't often pick more than two fly halves, but he did in 2023, and I think it meant that he had that experience that you kind of knew Anscombe and Bigger was retiring anyway, but Anscombe's not got many years to go, and especially with his injury issues. But yeah. Again, I wonder like what sort of benefit would at the moment at Gloucester. Granted, they didn't perform well at all last season, but you've got Thomas Williams at 9, Anscombe at 10. That could be a starting half-back partnership, and you could even then look at you got Max Hewell at 12. From what I've seen, they've linked quite well together already. So if you have that kind of cohesion again, and then someone like Costello coming on for the last 20 minutes, and you've got that kind of level-headedness from if they're in the lead or something, and even if they're not, it's kind of that would probably benefit Costello in the long run. Again, I think that's kind of the way forward, and obviously it's easier said than done. But I think chucking Costello in the deep end right now with some of the flack he's gotten, but like we look at the Six Nations, I thought as much as again I rate Johan Lloyd, you've got to look at Costello as being the man at 10 more so than Johan.
Yeah. Anscombe's 33, just accuracy's sake. So, yeah, I mean, he's never going to really make the next World Cup. But, I don't know, he could be the steadying influence. And like you say, he's playing with Thomas Williams. They're already familiar with each other. And then Max Llewellyn. I mean, as long as he can stay fit, I would pick him straight away, no question. But you saw when Costello come off the bench in the summer, and like there was no pressure, he was really creative and he was dangerous and he was actually bringing players in, and that's like what he can do. It just seems like, I don't know whether it's just the pressure of the game plan that doesn't suit him or something, but maybe he's just more suited to coming off the bench for Wales. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think if you look at if you have then a rotation of Anscombe and Costello, the two more similar players than say like a Bigger, when I think Bigger and Anscombe are kind of worlds apart in terms of the way they play. There's that kind of control the game element that they both can do quite well, but in terms of the style of play they had, whereas Anscombe and Costello were both like take the ball to the line and bring other players in a way that Bigger wouldn't. If you have that kind of same style of play, then going forward with Wales, it's almost interchangeable. You can just chuck Costello in with 20 minutes to go and ideally play the same style of play and not take your foot off the gas too much.
Yeah, and it's not that like upheaval with the guy at like 12 or 13 has now got to think, where is my running line's going to be because I'm playing with someone completely different. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. What do you fancy then for like the autumn? How many wins? No wins? One win? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I'd be surprised um, if we. I think you've got to look at the Australian results in the Rugby Championship where they've been pretty poor, especially that. I say that like obviously they got back into the game against New Zealand, but that Argentina game, uh, that was just insane. That you kind of look at that and think how did we lose to them in the summer? And I think the main problem Wales had in the summer was there was almost like too much respect for the Australians. Like it seemed any time we'd come close to them, we just concede something straight away. And
Yeah.
I think if there's an element of you can kind of pick the players, I think what one would obviously be not have Grady at 12, probably not have Ben Thomas at 10, and you can then kind of pick a game plan from there. There could be a chance you could beat Australia. Again, with Fiji, they're quite a bogey team for whatever team they play, and we've had some battles with them over the years.
They've been on fire in that like Pacific Cup or whatever. I've just been watching the highlights and they're just routing everyone.
Yeah, and especially there's not really they've not got any of their kind of they've not got many of their experienced players in that team. So once you bring them in the autumn, you've got 23 players who've just been playing consistently with each other, and then you can chuck in all the good players as well. They're going to be up for it in a way that Wales definitely won't be. But then,
Yeah, it's a scary prospect.
yeah, I would not fancy the likes of Tuasova, Randrandra, Bottia running down your channel. I'd be running straight down the tunnel if something like that was happening. I think that's the problem. Again, we've got such kind of inexperienced players that I'm not going to say they're not up for it, but how will their heads go if minute one of these big Fijians runs straight over them? It's going to kind of mess. I think confidence is one of the huge problems in Welsh rugby at the moment.
Yeah, 100%.
We've rarely been, when we've been a confident team, when we had a run of wins, we can almost beat anyone on their day. But now, it's the amount of losses we've had on the run. I just think it's Australia first, Fiji second, and South Africa third, isn't it?
I believe it's Fiji first.
Oh, it's Fiji first. Oh,
I think so. I'll check now.
God, that could be even worse.
Yeah, not a good start, is it? Let me check though. Yeah, it's Fiji first, and then Australia. Both on Sunday, annoyingly.
Yeah, no, I did see that. It's a bit disappointing. I think the whole kind of autumn runs on that Fiji game. Then, if we win, it could be that kind of momentum boost Wales need. But
Yeah.
if we lose, I can't see us then beating Australia. And I don't think we stand a chance against South Africa.